And a good hello to everybody in Master Control babysitting those boards. This is This Week in Amateur Radio, edition number 1251, with a release and air date of Saturday, February 18th, 2023. And we thank you for carrying our program on your air. So please stand by to take the program to your air following the upcoming Q-Tone. On the air and on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio. We are the world premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1251 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The United States Air Force may have shot down an amateur radio Pico balloon over Canada. We will tell you whose it was. The de-expedition to Beauvais Island wraps up operations. We will have a summary of that for you. The International Amateur Radio Union holds its first 2023 meeting to prepare for the upcoming World Radio Communication Conference 2023. The FCC creates room and shoehorns in another 16 full-power FM broadcast stations in certain locations across the country. We'll tell you where. Volunteers on the air operations continue at quite a brisk pace. The General Class Element 3 question pool errata has been released. We'll tell you the changes. AMSAT Engineering is recruiting additional volunteers. The Vermont Ham Convention is coming up next week. We will have all the details for you. NASA asks amateur radio operators to help out with experiments during some upcoming eclipses. A previously launched secret Russian satellite, with an unknown purpose, is breaking up in orbit. And if you are a shortwave listener, did you know that there are still spy radio stations on the air? We will tell you all about them in this week's report. These headline stories, of course, will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We're going to visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit and how you can work them. Our technology reporter, Rich DeMuro, will discuss and introduce you to OpenAI's ChatGPT and what it can do for you. Australia's own Arnold Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will answer the question, do you really know when the best time is to go on the air? Our own amateur radio historian, Bill Continelli, W2XOI, returns with another edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives. This week, Bill discusses amateurs' reactions to the proposed 1974 dual path to amateur radio licensing, and we'll look at the proposed Class E citizens band that would have taken 2 megahertz of the 220 band. Our tower climbing and antenna master, Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, will talk about how to build tower antenna mounts from scrap materials you may have hanging around the house or that you can easily acquire. And we will travel back in time to the FCC forum from the 2007 Dayton Hamvention for a talk about amateur radio enforcement action in an entertaining talk by the FCC enforcement chief at the time, Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH. All of that and a whole lot more is straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here in beautiful downtown Albany, New York, I'm George, W2XBS. And yes, I know the history behind my call sign.
And reporting from the newsroom in Half Moon, New York, I'm Terry Saunders, N1KIN.
And reporting this week from my ham shack in Cortlandville, New York, anticipating, hoping, waiting for spring, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our now mud season springtime again in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the geese are flying north and the maple trees are now filling sap buckets. And I saw a girl riding her horse and a motorcycle the other day. So it's springtime here. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
Reporting to you from just outside the capital of Albany in Glenmont, New York, this is Bob, W3BOO, Boo Radio.
And reporting from a windy and rainy Troy, New York News Bureau, I'm Eric, KD2, RJX.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're on the weather roller coaster of temps. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
And now with this week's lead story, here is Terry Saunders, N1KIN.
Leading off our news this week, since the famous takedown of a suspected Chinese spy balloon, U.S. jets have shot down a total of 3 more unidentified balloon objects, now confirmed to have been commercial or benign. There is speculation that at least one of these objects may have been an amateur radio Pico balloon. On Tuesday, the group said one of its balloons was last spotted at 12:48 a.m. on Saturday along an uninhabited island off the coast of Alaska. That tracks with when a U.S. F-22 used a Sidewinder missile to shoot down an object over the Yukon later that same day. Canadian officials have since said the debris will be extremely difficult to retrieve due to the frozen terrain and the remoteness of the site. One part of the amateur radio hobby is launching high-altitude balloons with various radio and other payloads. Larger amateur radio balloons launched in the USA require FAA clearance, need a radar reflector attached, and usually continually transmit APRS telemetry before naturally popping and falling back to Earth after a few hours, just like a weather balloon. Recently, questions were being raised about the whereabouts of an amateur radio balloon with a call sign K9YO-15, launched last October by a group known as the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade. Unconfirmed reports say the 32-inch sphere carrying a 10-gram payload may be the same one that was shot down over the Canadian Yukon. Lightweight and relatively inexpensive to build, its payload, with a solar panel package and a tracker in the middle, transmitted APRS telemetry on HF at very low power. The K9YO-15 balloon, which was launched from Illinois on October 10, 2022, was on its 7th circumnavigation of the globe after being aloft for 123 days. Carrie Willis, KD9ITO, a member of the group, said the balloon has been declared missing in action and is considered lost. The payload was a GPS module, Arduino SI5351, used as a whisper and APRS transmitter, and a solar panel, altogether weighing 16.4 grams. According to a post on the website RTLSDR.com, a memo from the U.S. Pentagon said that an object was shot down over Canada that appeared to be a small metallic balloon with a tethered payload. The description closely fits that of K9YO-15. Kerry also said, "I suppose anything is possible." He said FBI agents visited the balloon program's website and spent time with members of the group on a conference call. Kerry went on to say that he shared that besides having fun, we're here to teach others how to build and launch Pico balloons legally, following the Code of Federal Regulations relating to balloons. He said he told others on the balloon team that they should be proud of the project and what it has accomplished. He added, "Personally, I believe that if it were shot down, what a wonderful way to end our flight."
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
The 3Y0J activation of the Bouvet Island has finished. The team concluded operations at 300 UTC on February 14th, 2023, with around 19,000 contacts logged. With more details, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report.
The team has boarded the SV Marama and begun their journey to Cape Town, South Africa. They expect to arrive there by February 23rd. Photos uploaded to social media by Steve Haas and to AJ, the team's media officer, show the harsh reality of the operating environment there. The crew operated in tents with radios and equipment stacked on buckets. The effort was one of the most expensive de-expeditions of all time. The team raised $715,000 through donations and sponsorships, with each operator contributing a large sum to participate. The original plan was to operate for 22 days on the island. They had set a goal of 200,000 QSOs and hoped to operate up to 12 stations all at once across all bands and modes. Bouvet Island has long been number 2 on Club Log's DXCC Most Wanted list, right behind North Korea. Previous excursions to the remote island have also faced operational challenges, and Arctic weather, dangerous ice, and rough terrain prevented it from being an easy activation. More on the Bouvet Island expedition can be found at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
Team co-leader Kenneth Opskar, LA7GIA, took to Facebook to tell a bit of their story. His post highlights the physical and technical challenges the team faced. Pile-up was difficult as our signals were weak. We had good reception, and very often we called 3 to 5 times to log a QSO. Many DXers called but couldn't hear us. How frustrating, he wrote. We focused on fewer bands to maximize all-time new ones, and looking at the stats, we achieved 19,000 QSOs and 50% unique calls. And many dupes. Many are satisfied, but some are also disappointed by the performance of either the team or the DQRMers. In response to some posts on social media questioning the methods and tactics the team used, Opskar continued, as for Bouvet, there is no guarantee at all, whether you use 2 helicopters or a Zodiac. We wanted to make more contacts, but safety was and will always be more important than trying to push our limits in a risky environment. As Opskar referenced, getting the equipment into the island by boat provided to be a logistical challenge. During the second day, we got some supplies in a risky Zodiac operation in high swell. We lost several objects in the surf and punctured the Zodiac. The conditions on the beach were terrible. Due to the coming storm, we evacuated back to Marima on day 4. Despite this, we decided to scale down the DXpedition. We could not fight against Bouvet, but we had to adjust to the weather and go ashore when Bouvet allowed us, the post said. Without the planned kit, the team was largely limited to 2 radios at once. The only location on the island that was safe to set up camp had a large terrain feature in the direct path toward the east coast of the United States. With antennas limited to wire dipoles, power limited to the transceiver's rated output, and a massive rock in the short path to much of North America, operations were hindered. Bouvet Island has long been number 2 on Club Log's DXCC Most Wanted list, right behind North Korea. Previous excursions to the remote island also have faced operational challenges. Antarctic weather, dangerous ice, and rough terrain prevent it from being an easy activation.
The 56th meeting of the Administrative Council of the International Amateur Radio Union was held via Zoom on January 16th with President Tim Elam, VE6SH, presiding. The Council received reports from the officers of each of the 3 regions. The meeting's focus was on the International Telecommunication Union's upcoming World Radio Communication Conference 23 later this year in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The IARU effort for World Radio Conference 23 is being led by IARU Vice President Oleg Gasperstad, LA2RR. Here is a summary of the meeting submitted by International Amateur Radio Union Secretary Joel Harrison, W5ZN. Of particular interest to the amateur radio and amateur satellite services for WRC-23 is Agenda Item 9.1b, concerning the amateur allocation in the 23-centimeter band at 1240 to 1300 megahertz. The Radio Navigation Satellite Service is seeking protection from secondary users in addition to an expanded allocation. Preparatory work for this item is being conducted within the International Telecommunications Union's Working Party 5-A. IARU Global WRC-23 9.1b team, led by Barry Lewis, G4SJH, has been consulting with the amateur community, resulting in a contribution to the draft guidance recommendation in support of coexistence with the Radio Navigation Satellite Service. Details on this work can be found at www.iaru.org. The Council reviewed a comprehensive written report from IARU Electromagnetic Compatibility Coordinator Dr. Martin Satch, G8KDF, on his work with the International Special Committee on Radio Interference. The International Special Committee on Radio Interference was formed in 1934 to set standards for controlling electromagnetic interference in electrical and electronic devices. CISPR's specific areas include radio interference measurements and statistical methods, and limits for the protection of radio frequencies. An ongoing strategic planning review of the current IARU structure is being conducted within several working groups. The Administrative Council received reports from the Futures Working Group Steering Committee, Relationship Working Group, Governance Working Group, and the Legal Working Group. This work is scheduled for completion no later than July to allow discussion at the Region 1 General Conference in Serbia in October, with additional opportunities provided to the other two regions. Region 1 has received several inquiries regarding the status of John de Voldier's ON1UN and Mark de Melanier's ON4WW book, Ethics and Operating Procedures for the Radio Amateur, and is considering how this document can be updated. The summary record for this meeting, in addition to previous meetings, is available at the IARU website. The next virtual meeting of the Administrative Council is scheduled for March 20th, and an in-person meeting is scheduled for June 25th at the conclusion of ham radio in Friedrichshafen, Germany. The members of the IARU Administrative Council are the President, Vice President, Secretary, and 2 members from each of the regional organizations. Founded in 1925, the International Amateur Radio Union is the worldwide voice of radio amateurs who secure and safeguard the amateur radio spectrum. ARRL serves as the International Secretariat of the IARU.
According to Radio World magazine, the Federal Communications Commission has made room for 16 new broadcast stations on FM and expects there will be competition for the spots on the spectrum. Most of the new allocations for new FM radio stations will occur in small rural communities, from Minnesota and Missouri to Texas and Vermont. The Commission has opened up 16 FM allotments in areas eligible for a new service. The FM table is updated by the FCC after its staff engineers determined that the vacant allotments comply with the agency's minimum distance separation requirements and city-grade coverage requirements. The areas that are eligible for a new FM station include Grand Portage, Minnesota, Bunker, Missouri, Junction and Sonora in Texas, and Barton, Vermont. The FCC says all new FM commercial allotments are subject to an auction process, and competing applications may be filed once the Commission decides it is ready to accept applications. When competing applications are filed, an auction may need to occur before the allotments are allocated.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Ham Radio Outlet has announced that it will be closing its San Diego, California store. The last day of operations will be on Saturday, February 25th, 2023. Store spokesman said that it's with great sadness that we're closing the San Diego location. In late 2022, Ham Radio Outlet was notified by the building owner that they would not renew the lease. Since that time, we've been searching the surrounding area for a new location. However, recent extreme increases in rent and non-business friendly policies by the state, county, and city governments have made locating and affording a viable location all but impossible. Their press release went on to say that they thank all our loyal customers throughout the years that made Ham Radio Outlet San Diego a premier location for amateur radio operators, and went on to remind amateurs that their website is available around the clock. They also stated that their Anaheim, California location will remain operational.
Volunteers on the air operations continue at a brisk pace, with tens of thousands of volunteer and W1AW portable contacts having been made. 12 points for volunteers on the air scoring must come through Logbook of the World uploads. As announced in the January 2023 issue of QST, this is not a QSL card event. There will not be any W1AW portable state activation volunteers on the air QSL cards issued from ARRL headquarters. Please do not send W1AW portable VODA QSL cards for VODA contacts to ARRL headquarters. W1AW portable VODA QSL cards received by ARRL headquarters will not be acknowledged.
The General Class Element 3 Question Pool Errata has been released. The National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators, NCVEC, Question Pool Committee has released the latest errata for the 2023 through 2027 Element 3 General Question Pool, which goes into effect on July 1st, 2023. 9 questions were modified and 2 questions were withdrawn from use. The pool is available as a Microsoft Word document and PDF. These changes are reflected in the new General Pool download file dated February 1st, 2023.
AMSAT is looking for an electronics engineer with RF experience to join its Fox Plus team. You'll collaborate with an all-volunteer team of up to 10 electrical, mechanical, software, and systems engineers. You will have the opportunity to design and build the RF communication subsystems for a series of low Earth orbit 1U to 3U CubeSats to support AMSAT's educational and engineering objectives. You should have a working knowledge of analog and digital communication protocols like FM, PSK, FSK, for example, to provide digitally synthesized audio for FM-modulated VHF, UHF, SHF voice and telemetry channels. Development opportunities can begin with modification of previous Fox designs and/or by starting with a blank sheet for an original design. AMSAT's also looking for mechanical engineers to join its Fox and Golf CubeSat teams. You'll collaborate with an all-volunteer team of up to 12 electrical, mechanical, software, and systems engineers. You'll have the opportunity to use your structural design and analysis skills in the development of a series of low Earth orbit and highly elliptical orbit 1U to 3U CubeSats to support AMSAT's educational and engineering objectives. Your contribution may include the development of the space frame and deployable solar panel subsystem, the analysis of the thermal characteristics of the CubeSat and the design of the thermal management system, preparation and oversight of the environmental testing procedure, and/or management of documentation of the CubeSat's adherence to the launch provider and space vehicle owner's specifications. Our volunteers typically spend 5 hours per week on their project and attend a weekly online update meeting. An amateur radio license and CubeSat experience is helpful but not necessary. U.S. citizenship or proof of permanent residency is required. Interested persons should send an email with their resume and curriculum vitae to volunteer@amsat.org. That address again, volunteer@amsat.org.
The 6th Annual Amateur Radio Science Citizen Investigation, or HAMSCI workshop, will be held March 17th through the 18th, 2023, in person at the University of Scranton and virtually via Zoom. The workshop is open to students and citizen scientists, and all amateur radio operators are invited to attend. The theme of the 2023 HAMSCI workshop is Foreign Amateur Professional Bonds. The primary objective is to bring together the amateur radio community and professional scientists. This year, the workshop will feature a working special event amateur radio station using the call sign W3USR. In-person participants can stop by the station to operate or learn how an amateur radio station works. The Mergus Amateur Radio Club K3YTL is organizing and running the W3USR special event station. The 2023 HAMSCI workshop is organized by the University of Scranton with generous financial support provided by the United States National Science Foundation and Amateur Radio Digital Communications. HAMSCI is an officially recognized NASA citizen science project. Registration for the in-person workshop is now open and will be closed on Monday, March 6th, 2023. Virtual participation is free of charge. For more information and registration information, visit the HAMSCI webpage.
The National Science Foundation awarded a nearly $50,000 grant to Nathaniel Frizzell, Assistant Professor of Physics and Electrical Engineering at the University of Scranton, to support the Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation Workshop 2023. He also received a grant of just over $25,000 from Amateur Radio Digital Communications to support the workshop. The Ham Sci Workshop 2023 will take place March 17th and 18th at the University of Scranton and the historic Radisson at Lackawanna Station. The Ham Sci Workshop plays a unique and important role in the development of both the amateur radio community and the scientific workforce, said Dr. Frizzell, who noted there are more than 770,000 licensed ham radio operators in the United States and about 3 million worldwide. Each year, the workshop brings together many young student researchers and experienced scientists, engineers and amateur radio operators in an environment where they can share ideas and learn from each other. The Ham Sci is a collective of professional researchers and licensed amateur radio operators with the objective to foster collaborations between the amateur and professional communities for the purposes of advancing scientific research and understanding, encouraging the development of new technologies to support this research, and to provide educational opportunities for the amateur radio community and the general public.
HamCon, the ARRL Vermont Convention, is coming up on Saturday, February the 25th, from 8 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. at the Hampton Inn Convention Center off of I-89 Exit 16 in Colchester, Vermont. We would love to get folks from Eastern New York back to the convention again. We are a comfortable 2-hour drive north of Saratoga and a bit more from Albany, said Mitch Stern, W1SJ. There is plenty of lodging, eating, and shopping within 2 miles of the convention. But if you cannot travel for some reason, please do consider joining the convention online. Simply buy an advance sale ticket, which will allow you to join in and take part in all the forums and even view the forums afterwards. Information and tickets can be found at www.ham-con.org. Our theme for HamCon 2023 is Getting on the Air. There are many facets to amateur radio, but the most popular and endearing activity is getting on the air and contacting other hams. Our lineup of forums and activities will emphasize just that. If you are going to get on the air, you might as well be great at your craft. Be the best operator you can be with W1SJ. Will detail all the fine points of making all those QSOs. And you don't have to sit at home in your basement to get on the air. Get Out and Operate with K1BIF will show how we make contacts from parks, summits, farms, and even boats. And if that's not enough for you, Operate from Anywhere Remotely with W1VE will detail how you can access a ham shack anywhere on the planet from the comforts of home. There is nothing like working the world while driving on a long trip. Operating an HF mobile station with AB10C will cover how to set up, build, and operate an HF mobile station capable of working anyone. Experienced operators will tell you that there is a rhythm to making many contacts, much like a dance. K8ZT will describe this for us in the rhythm of the QSO. Some hams take their operating very seriously as they compete in contests. We'll explore the World Radio Team Championship, the Olympics of Ham Radio in the WRTC competitive experience with N9RV. We'll also have the 2023 running of the ARRL Forum and find out the latest from our national organization. And finally, how well do you know your ham radio trivia? Join us for the Millionaire Game Show, where we will ask such questions and you may just win a cool fake $1 million. Add to the above the flea market, tech table, DMR table, W1V special event station, demonstrations, and VE session, and we have one heck of a show. Be sure to buy your ticket early and be there. Again, look us up at www.ham-con.org for all the details on HamCon 2023, February 25th in Vermont. See you there!
Looking for older editions of our news service? You can find them all as part of the digital library of amateur radio and communications through the facilities of the Internet Archive. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
I'm Byron Lee, KC9EEK. We'll bring you a number of excerpts from the FCC Forum, one of the most attended Hamvention forums. We'll begin with 2 excerpts from a highly entertaining yet effective presentation by Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, the Special Counsel for Amateur Radio Enforcement. Riley has the task of dealing with enforcement issues and other related problems that are brought to the FCC by the ham community. Here's part 1 of his talk we've dubbed Lighten Up. Riley Hollingsworth.
Well, you could have gone to the flea market, but you decided to come to church instead. So I got you now. I want to thank you for coming here to Dayton. Just by your sheer numbers, you make the Hamvention one of the most powerful forces in amateur radio, and it shows you're serious about it and you care about its future. And by participating in an event such as this, you help ensure its future because you show your numbers and you show your determination. I've been talking to you for quite a few years now, and I'm not going to go over enforcement updates. There's no need for me to waste your time with that. You can follow amateur radio enforcement in the publications at CQ, QST, a Rain Report, Newsline, and the ARRL website, and now our own FCC enforcement website list enforcement actions that you can go to and track them there. And that's a recent change that the Bureau Chief offered to do, which we were very happy with. I want to talk about what bothers me the most about amateur radio, and I want to give you a homework assignment. First, the blatant rule violations. I think you can see that we're taking care of them, or most of them, on a gradual basis. Your violations are about what we would expect, or the magnitude of violations are about what we would expect from a service this size. What concerns me most is this. You still need to lighten up. I said this last year, but you need to take it to heart more. All of you have different interests, and all of you can learn from each other. And you need to work together more and show a little more respect for your diverse interests and for the service as a whole. It isn't about you. It isn't about enforcement. It's about amateur radio. Every time you get on the air, you need to decide what's most important to you. The best interest of amateur radio as a whole, or your own pride, or your own ego. Now, I realize I may be preaching to the choir here, but on the air, you need to be more cooperative and less argumentative, and I need you to take this message back to people who didn't get here and who may not understand this. Your assignment, one part of it, is to read Dave Sumner's article in May QST, page 9. Everybody will have one just judging on the size of this crowd, but if for some reason you don't get one or you don't have time to pick one up, contact me, and I'll get one to you. Let me read just one little sentence from it. Most of the unpleasantness that erupts from time to time on the most popular HF bands can be avoided if we're willing to be flexible in our frequency selection. That's about all you need to know about amateur radio. Because I have good news and bad news for you. The good news is there's nothing wrong with amateur radio. It's a good service that's showing its value to the public on a day-to-day basis. The bad news is there's an element of amateur radio that too often reflects present society generally, and there's not a lot we can do about that except to hope that the pendulum swings. Whatever the phenomenon is behind road rage, whatever that is, and I'm not going to try to define it, that's what I'm talking about. All of you need to work together more and depend upon the FCC less to solve your operating problems. We got a few specific messages to different groups. To the nets, it doesn't matter how long you've been on that frequency. All frequencies are shared. A group of 3 or 4 people meeting on the same frequency every night for 75 years, using 1,200 watts when 100 would do just fine. That's not a net, that's a round table. No net on planet Earth is an oasis of amateur radio. The world is not going to end if you vary the frequency or even if you don't meet one night. To the widebanders, if you want to operate a broadcast station, apply for one. Extraordinarily wide signals on crowded spectrum at peak times are rude and inconsiderate and set you back. To the contesters, use a little more courtesy and remember that even when operating split, you don't own a frequency, they all are shared. To those that don't like contesters, lighten up. Contests are short-lived. If they're bothering you, go to the work bands, wash the car, cut the grass. And learn from the contesters. Some of these contesters are the best radio operators on planet Earth. And the nets need to learn from the contesters on how to get messages through and not take 15 minutes to get a 10-second message with phonetics through. To the repeater owners, you don't own the frequency just because you're coordinated for it. A coordination is only a recommendation, and get your paperwork together. And remember, it's your call sign on the repeater, and nobody asked you to start a repeater. If you shut down the repeater tomorrow, you know what would happen? People would use other repeaters. It's no different than leaving your den door open if that's where your station is. If you let people in and they misuse it, lock the door. Don't ask us to babysit. That's what control operators are for. To the QRPers, thank you for your vitality, your inspiration, and your enthusiasm, and for being builders again. I wish I could spread your enthusiasm across all sections of amateur radio. And when I see you folks, the QRPers, I see the excitement and magic of my first contact. And to those of you who don't like QRPers, anyone can use a linear amplifier as a crutch. To those that don't like de-expeditions, if a group of people want to go to the islands or sit on a rock for a week in the ocean, live in tents in 100-degree weather, swat mosquitoes and scorpions, and operate ham equipment, lighten up and let them do it. I can't tell you how many complaints I got about Scarborough Reef all week long. It wasn't even under our jurisdiction. It was chaos for a few days, and then it was over. 46,000 contacts, and about half of them CW. Nobody would have even known about it if the league hadn't published it. Somebody thought it was important. About 46,000 people thought it was important. But it's over now. And back to your homework. Most of the unpleasantness that erupts from time to time on the most popular HF bands can be avoided if we're willing to be flexible on our frequency selection. Dave Sumner's article. You're calling the FCC too much to solve your problems. To all operators in general, I say this. This is just about a 40-year-old QST magazine. Next to the last page is a big presentation on Swan equipment. How many of you remember Swan transceivers? Boy, they were the latest and greatest, weren't they? Well, let's take the 350. It has 12 little knobs and one big knob. So does the 500, and so does the 250. So then take this QST magazine about 40 years later. Let's look on the back. TS570, it's got 46 little knobs, one big knob. And you look in the last page there, there's the 2000. And I remember last year I heard a guy behind me when I was looking at it saying, "That's so big and pretty, I couldn't get that in the house unnoticed." I thought that was a good remark. By the way, if you ever hear that I'm dead, race to Gettysburg to my house, because every piece of equipment in my house cost about $150. You can get some good deals. But this FT2000 has 75 little knobs, but it's still got one big knob right here. There's a reason for that, and there's a reason that you have thousands of frequencies. My pet peeve, too many are like people at a shopping center. You'll argue over a parking space when there are 150 vacant ones. You have to look at it this way. Every city has a bad neighborhood. It's an area that'll just take time and more resources to clean up. There are economic, sociological problems and other things, mental problems. like the ham bands. But if you had 3 alternative streets that you could take to work, and one was through a bad neighborhood, and every time you drove that street, somebody hit your windshield with a rock, wouldn't you take another street after, say, 5 or 6 windshields? 8 or 10 windshields? So who's the bigger idiot? The person throwing the rock, or the person that drives down that street every day when they don't have to do it? Well, why don't you take the same approach to the amateur bands?
You're listening to a talk by FCC Special Counsel for Amateur Radio Enforcement, Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, given at the Dayton Hamvention. We'll conclude our first installment of his remarks in just a moment.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
And now, here's Riley to conclude his talk we've dubbed Lighten Up.
Let's look at 14275. It's a bad neighborhood. Probably in the future, we will find out that there is no problem with RF radiation brain damage at all, except on 14275. They're very poor operators on that frequency. There's a very poor operator in Canada. Canada considers him a fruitcake, apparently, and they're not taking him seriously, and their rules are pretty lax, and they are in amateur enforcement about where we were about 10 years ago. But I get complaints every day from operators who go to 14275 and they get abused. They get on the frequency and they make it worse, because instead of it being a Canadian problem, in a few minutes it becomes an American problem too, because they get into the fray. And I listened to an argument or discussion the other day on 275, and one of the comments was, well, I'm not going to be driven off this frequency. I got rights. So there again, most of the unpleasantness that erupts from time to time on the most popular HF frequencies can be avoided if we're willing to be flexible. It's an international problem. It's not our jurisdiction. We're talking to Canada, we're working with them, but they're in a different state of mind, and they consider the fellow to be several French fries short of a Happy Meal. And they're not going to put a lot of resources in it, apparently. There's a similar operator in Italy. Use the big knob, go somewhere else. Report the problem, that's part of your self-policing function, but don't become part of it. The world is ugly enough. Don't add to it. You have control over that problem. You can defuse it and refuse to become part of it, and that's the contribution you can make to amateur radio. I asked one participant on 14275 why he always hung out on 14275. And he said, well, old so-and-so likes to talk there, and he doesn't have any other antennas. So this must be a very precisely cut antenna not to work anywhere else, even on 20 meters. Remember the saying from the 60s, what if they gave a war and nobody came? How many of you remember that? What if they gave an argument on the ham bands and nobody came? And to be honest with you, too much of society today is rude, self-important, cell phone yapping, road raging, stressed out monsters behind the wheel, or unfortunately, behind the microphone. It's a similar thing. Now, that's it in a nutshell. We can't save you from yourselves. The best enforcement program in the world won't do that. The Orientals have a saying about Americans. They say we'll lose butt if it means saving face. And as Dave Sumner again says in this article, there's plenty of room for everyone who wants to operate. Now, when you decline to be part of a problem, you make the greatest contribution to amateur radio. We can enforce the rules. We can enforce kindness, courtesy, or common sense. But as a very wise person named Bill Cross once told me, we can't regulate stupid. We are all ordinary people. We're going to make mistakes. So much of the interference on the amateur bands is absolutely unintentional. The best interference report and solution, I carry this with me everywhere, because I got a complaint. I've listened to it all day. It's a drift net beacon, at least that's what I think it is, on 75 meters. It's S9 here at home, so it's probably up or down the bay. See if you can have somebody do direction finding on it. So that was at 4:57 p.m. At 6:29 p.m., you're going to laugh. I found out it was my Linksys 5-port Ethernet switch in the next room. When I tried to DF it with a selective AM radio, I noticed the signal went silent when I left the house. That was the clue. I started turning off my gear, and it was my switch. Now, exactly, and had this been on 14275, you would have heard an hour-and-a-half discussion as to who was doing it and why. We're all ordinary people, and we make mistakes, especially with today's equipment. About a week ago, I became convinced that my CW keyer was out. I hadn't been on the air in about a month and a half. I became convinced that it had gone south. I substituted keyers, I checked all the cables, and finally I remembered that you've got to push the MOX or the VOX button to use this thing on CQ. And I've had this thing for 3 years. I just forgot about it. I hadn't been on in a while. I'm supposed to know this stuff. Our new flat screen was in black and white until I realized I had the cables wrong. And my wife said, "And you work for the FCC." We're all ordinary people. We may think we're special. We may think Americans are special. We're all ordinary people, and we're going to make mistakes. Even the public safety services don't have thousands of frequencies that they can use like you do, hundreds of usable ones at any given time. You have those so you can have alternative plans and be fail-safe. That's why you have so many frequencies that aren't channelized. One net, when it has interference problems, says, okay, we're going to frequency B, and they just stay silent for a half hour. Come back on and there's no problem. And whoever is after them, it drives them crazy because they can't find them. You know? It's a good tactic. But use your frequencies. Use your frequencies and try the WARC bands. They're great. People who haven't been on them just love them. And to those of you who have been continual problems and we haven't gotten to you yet, you have a problem coming up now. Your renewals are coming up. You have the burden of proof. You have to come to a hearing in Washington, D.C. You have to make a case as to why you should keep the license. You have a lot of questions to answer, and the chickens are coming home. And finally, to all of you who will complain about the code being eliminated, I'll say this. If it was such an earth-shaking issue, why did less than 1% of you even file comments on it? Why is it important now, but it wasn't important then? Number two, how can it be a filter if the worst enforcement problems we have are advanced and extra class license? Number three, it wasn't eliminated. It just isn't required. For a driver's test, do you have to know how to operate a 6-speed transmission? I don't think so, but those are some of the coolest cars on the road, with the 5- and 6-speed transmissions. The idea of eliminating the code has been floating around for years, yet there is more and more code equipment today than ever before, and you'll see it today. We won't know the effect for 10 years. Now, personally, I worked code 90%. I honestly don't see it as a potential enforcement problem. I'm loyal to the code, but my bet is dropping the code requirement will turn out to be, over time, a stroke of genius. We'll know for sure in about 10 years I won't be here because all these ham-fest hot dogs will have caught up with me by then. So you'll have to go over the mountain on your own. But if we don't do something to appeal to greater numbers, in a few years there won't be enough room out here for all the walkers. We're getting old. We need to try new things and always work towards keeping amateur radio dynamic. You just have to know the issues, participate in it, try to be courteous even when it goes against every grain of your core being, and enjoy it. And I want to thank you again for all the incredible support that you've given our enforcement program. The self-regulating aspect of this service never ceases to amaze me. And in closing, I want to say I've been working for you for 8 years, 7 months, 16 days, 2 hours, and 15 minutes. I can't imagine a better group of licensees to work with. And I've always had interesting jobs at the commission, and I'm one of the few people on planet Earth, I think, who have always just enjoyed my job. But you folks are the best, and I'm so thankful I get to work with you. And I want to thank you for all your passion and all your dedication. Thank you.
That was the talk that we've dubbed Lighten Up, delivered at the Dayton Hamvention FCC Forum by FCC Special Counsel for Amateur Radio Enforcement, Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH. I'm Byron Lee, KC9EEK.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts. And now, here is our tech guy, Rich DeMuro.
What is going on? I'm Rich DeMuro, and this is Rich on Tech, the show where I talk about the tech stuff I think you should know about, and it's the place about technology. This was a huge week for artificial intelligence, and this is what I love about hanging out with people like my family, my friends who are not necessarily techies. It's because I live in a world where I just assume the knowledge base, right? I've been hearing about ChatGPT now for weeks. I've been playing with it. I've been talking about it. And then you sit down to dinner with a bunch of what I call regular folks, and I break out the ChatGPT talk, and next thing you know, the record stops. It skips. Everyone at the table is like, "What are you talking about, Rich?" And I said, "Wait, what? You don't know about ChatGPT? This has single-handedly turned the tech world upside down in the span of a couple of weeks. It is bringing Google to a screeching halt as well. It's making Microsoft maybe have a chance to be on top once again with their Bing search engine. It is changing everything." So ChatGPT launched a couple of weeks ago. It's from a company called OpenAI. And imagine instead of a search engine, you're feeding all of the world's information into this AI chatbot that can respond to you in a very human-like manner. That's what's happening with ChatGPT. Now, keep in mind, ChatGPT is not perfect. It's not up to date. The last time it was updated was 2021 with its knowledge. I mean, the technology is up to date, but the information that it's fed is only through 2021 because it's a research tool. But it's been enough to really make these big companies think about their future, especially Google. So this week, both Google and Microsoft said, you know what? We've got AI. We're going to show it off to the world. Google showed off this thing called Bard, which is its AI search engine. And they didn't really show too much of it. They just said, you know, it kind of has a lot of the same features as ChatGPT, except it's fresher. We've got all the Google information built into this search engine. And then Bing actually invited journalists up to their headquarters near Seattle. And they said, we're going to show you this, and we're going to show you what we have. And by the way, we're going to unveil this to the world and let actual people use this like very soon, like now. And so they showed off the new Bing, which has ChatGPT built in, but a newer, fresher version of ChatGPT built in. I know, if this all sounds wild, it really is. But if you use one of these search engines, it's just incredible what it does. It talks to you like a human would. It talks to you like your friend might. You can ask it almost anything. You can ask it to write you an email to your employer saying, I'd like a job, or I'd like to quit my job, or I'd like a raise. Or you can ask it to write a sales proposal. Or you can tell it, hey, give me 10 of the best things to do when I'm in Italy for a week. It's not just Microsoft and Google. A search engine named Neva, they've already got an AI search result. Chinese search engine Baidu, they are testing their Ernie bot. Chinese commerce giant Alibaba, they're testing AI for shopping, which leads me to think, hey, where's Amazon in all of this? Imagine instead of just searching Amazon for a particular product, you tell the Amazon AI search bot exactly what you need. You're looking for a couch that measures this exact dimension. You want it in this exact color, in this exact fabric. And instead of shuffling through all kinds of links and products and seeing what they have to offer, it will give you the exact couch that meets your specific criteria. This is where the future is headed. It is quite incredible. Look, the bottom line here, search, content, and the ad business around search is going to be forever changed by this technology. And that has a really big implication for Google. Google, you're wondering, why didn't you have search AI out of the gate? Why weren't you first? Well, because this turns their entire advertising business upside down. When you do a Google search, what do you see at the top? You see links advertising links that pay Google. Google hopes you tap those links because guess what? It makes them money. And that's their entire business. They made billions in the last quarter that way. Now, if you're just tapping something or typing something into a search engine, you get the exact answer you need without clicking a whole bunch of links, some of those links paying Google. Now what? How does Google make money? It's a really big question I think they are really struggling to answer right now. AI is going to have a big impact on everything. Every industry you can think about, restaurants, clothing, cars, and more. It is going to be a wild ride. I hope you check out some of these AI search engines because it is just quite incredible. And bringing it back to the dinner table last night, I'm not kidding. Everyone started going on ChatGPT, looking up answers and things, and their minds were just opened up. They just said, wow, this is incredible. And it's just going to have so many implications for the way I do my job and also my kids and what they're going to do. All right, if you can believe it, that's going to do it for this episode of the show. My name once again is Rich DeMuro. Thanks so much for listening.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Getting on air and making noise is a phrase that you've likely heard me repeat often. Actually, this will be the 24th time or so. It's an attempt at encouraging you to actually transmit and use the radio spectrum that is available to you. It's a nicer way of saying use it or lose it. One of the more frustrating aspects of our hobby is finding other people to interact with. At the beginning of your hobby, you have access to all these magic radio frequencies, with no idea on how to use them. Often a new amateur will turn on their radio, call CQ a couple of times to see if there's anyone out there, hear nothing, and give up. As you get more experience, you'll discover that radio frequencies change over time, and that some work better at certain times of the day. This is reinforced by others who will talk to you about propagation, the solar cycle, and how the ionosphere and its various so-called layers will change and what you can achieve throughout the day, the year, and the long-term cycle. Armed with all this knowledge, you're likely to get to a point where you make noise on a certain band depending on the time of day. For example, experienced amateurs will avoid the 10-meter band at night because it's a so-called daytime band. In other words, their perception is that you cannot make contact on the 10-meter band after sunset, and for the same reason it's not suitable for early morning contacts. What if we could test that perception and see if it's true or not? Turns out that we have a perfect data set to discover what actually happens. If I look at the 10-meter whisper or weak signal propagation reporter data for the past year, a year that had me using a beacon pretty much 24 hours a day, you'd expect that you could see just which times worked and which ones didn't. Turns out that regardless of time of day, my beacon was heard across every hour of the day. Of course, the numbers aren't uniform across the day. The peak is at noon local time. The trough is at 5 a.m. local time. 10% of reports are at noon, about 1.5% at 5 a.m. In other words, the worst time of day for my beacon to be reported is 5 a.m. in the morning, and it's not zero. Interestingly, the same isn't true for the signal-to-noise ratio, a measure of just how weak or strong a signal is in comparison to the local noise at the receiver. If you account for differences in transmitter power, meaning that a stronger transmitter is measured in the same way as a weaker one, the 10-meter band has the best signal-to-noise ratio at my location at 9 p.m. local time, and the worst at 4 p.m. local time. Given that I'm only using the 10-meter band with my beacon, I also looked at the local Oscar Foxtrot 78 grid square across all bands. It shows that reports are not directly related to when the average signal-to-noise is best. It seems to me that people are transmitting when they think it works best, not when it actually works best. And I'll mention that the definition of best depends on each user. Note that I haven't yet sat down to discover if there are automatic transmitter and receiver pairs that have been reporting 24/7 across a year on the same band, to determine if there is more to learn about the relationship between how often something is reported and what the signal report was at the time. I can say that it's likely that your favorite band is more popular when others think it's popular, not when the conditions are better. Consider, for example, that there are no local reports on the 12-meter band at 10 a.m., but there are at 9 a.m. and at 11 a.m. So was the band magically unusable the whole year at that time, or did people just not use it? The same is true for 160 meters. No reports at all before 5 p.m. or after 3 a.m., despite the bands around it having contacts throughout the day. I will point out some things I've ignored. For example, what is a useful contact? Is it measured by distance, by quantity, by uniqueness? Is this choice the same for each band? Is it reasonable to compare a whole year, or should it be by some other time period, like month, season, or lunar month? What is the signal-to-noise ratio for a band that's considered closed? I'm mentioning this because each of those will directly affect what it looks like when you create a chart, and it's likely to change what works best for you. So, next time you get on air, try a band that shouldn't work according to your knowledge and see what happens. Perhaps you'll get lucky, make a contact, and discover something unexpected. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Are you ready for another excursion into amateur radio history? This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, and I'll be back in a moment with another installment of the Ancient Amateur Archives.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
In our last installment, we took a look at the new dual-ladder licensing system proposed by the FCC late in 1974. In effect, there would be two parallel series of amateur radio licenses, with 29 megahertz as the line of demarcation. Series A covered the frequencies below 29 megahertz and included the novice, general, advanced, and extra classes. The conditional class would be abolished. Extra and advanced classes received a power increase. The advanced class would get access to the extra phone bands, and generals would lose power, frequencies, certain modes of operation, and the ability to be a trustee of a club station or a repeater. Series B covered the frequencies above 29 megahertz and included two new license classes: the communicator, which would be FM only above 144 megahertz, and the experimenter, which would offer all amateur privileges above 29 megahertz. Like generals, technicians would lose big. In fact, those who took their exam by mail, or over 90%, would not be allowed to renew. Reaction to the proposal was strong but somewhat puzzling. Instead of a vehement output of negative comments from the 180,000 general, conditional, and technician class amateurs who stood to lose substantial privileges and, in many cases, their very licenses, instead, comments concentrated on the no-code communicator class. Amateurs were overwhelmingly against it. In fact, the communicator license received the same amount of contempt and disdain that the hobby class proposal had received a few years back. However, while amateurs were debating the FCC restructuring proposal on the air and in letters to QST, the ARRL was unusually quiet. Why weren't they coming out with a position? The answer, in a word, was incentive, as in incentive licensing. The ARRL had learned its lesson back in the 1960s when it had submitted its proposal for restrictive phone bans. Now, before any response was made, the ARRL wanted to know exactly what the members wanted. Thus, the league sent out a comprehensive survey to all 100,000 members. 56%, or 56,000, myself included, returned the questionnaires. The ARRL tabulated the results, printed them in a multi-page report in QST, and then, in the summer of 1975, submitted their own proposal to the FCC. The ARRL's plan kept the basic amateur structure that was in existence, but with a few changes. The league suggested a basic amateur license, which would provide limited VHF operating privileges. The basic amateur would not actually have to pass a code exam, but would have to be familiar with CW characters. The trick here, of course, is that once someone has memorized the letters, numbers, and basic punctuation marks, they're at 5 words per minute already. So this wasn't really a no-code license, but it did eliminate formal CW testing. As for technicians, the League once again asked that they no longer be burdened with the experimenter designation, that they receive novice HF subbands, and that they receive full VHF privileges. Generals would see their code requirement drop to 10 words per minute, while the advanced class would be bumped up to 15 words per minute. No major changes were proposed for the extra class. Unlike the 1960s, when the ARRL was blasted for shoving incentive licensing at the members, this proposal was met with overall approval and appreciation from amateurs. In the end, although the FCC dropped the dual ladder idea, they did incorporate many of the ARRL's ideas into future rule changes. Technicians were mainstreamed into the amateur license structure, novices received expanded privileges to eventually include HF and VHF phone, and the FCC, after years of restrictive proposals, finally chose the path of gradual deregulation. But the dual ladder story was not the only event of 1975. When amateurs weren't arguing over the evils of the communicator class, they were blasting the idea of Class E CBE. What is it? In summary, the Electronics Industry Association, or EIA, proposed taking up to 2 MHz of our 220 band and turning it over to a new CB service. With 25 kHz spacing between the channels, the new EIA Class E CB could have as many as 80 channels. The EIA claimed that the 23-channel CB band at 27 MHz was impossibly overcrowded and worthless for local communications among legitimate users. Remember, this was at the same time of the gas crisis and the CB boom. The EIA argued that a skip-free area was needed for CB and that the 220 band was underutilized by hams. The EIA's proposals, in fact, were quite stringent, and had it not been for their unfortunate choice of frequencies, they may have received the support of the ARRL. But the EIA was trying to mix matter and antimatter, in this case amateur frequencies and CB. This had happened once before in 1958 when Class D CB was created out of our 11-meter band. Never again, was the cry from hams. The explosion of protest from the amateur community was palatable. Amateurs pointed out that CB wouldn't be such a mess if everyone obeyed the Part 95 rules, and the FCC took some enforcement action. The ARRL stated that the CBers themselves were opposed to 220 MHz CB, which was only partially true. The only CB operators surveyed were those who read hobby-type magazines such as S9. They were opposed to anything that would take them away from the skip and DX zone into a tightly regulated land of local communications. Lost in the emotional shuffle was the logical point that CB did not belong in the HF spectrum. In the end, with the strong opposition of the ARRL and the indifferent support of CBers who really wanted to stay on HF, the FCC dropped the idea. Instead, in late 1976, the FCC expanded the CB band from 23 to 40 channels and prohibited the sale of the older 23-channel units. This created a mini bonanza for hams who snapped up the obsolete 23-channel units at fire sale prices and converted them to 10 meters. As a postscript, amateurs did lose 2 MHz of our 220 band in the early 1990s. These frequencies are now in no man's land, unused. Which is better, to lose 2 MHz to a service that hams and their families could use productively, or to lose it to something that is inaccessible and doesn't even exist yet? In our next installment, we will look at the war protest movement in 1970 and how it affected amateur radio. I hope you will join me.
The 2023 QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo will be held on March 25th and 26th, and registration is now open. The event is fully interactive virtual ham radio convention offering new content, networking opportunities, and more. 50 amateur radio presentations and more will be available on a wide variety of subjects. There's still time to participate in the event as a presenter. You can submit an application to present a video on a topic of your choice. The deadline for submission is February 15th of 2023. Tickets are $15 and registration information can be found at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo website.
NASA says, ham radio operators, we're calling you. Members of the Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation will be making radio contacts during the 2023 and 2024 North American eclipses, probing the Earth's ionosphere. It will be a fun, friendly event with a competitive element, and you're invited to participate. Both amateur and professional broadcasters have been sending and receiving radio signals around the Earth for over a century. Such communication is possible due to interactions between our Sun and the ionosphere, the ionized region of the Earth's atmosphere located roughly 80 to 1,000 kilometers overhead. The upcoming eclipses are October 14th, 2023 and April 8th, 2024, and will provide unique opportunities to study these interactions. As you and other HAMSCI members transmit, receive, and record signals across the radio spectrum during the eclipse, you will create valuable data to test computer models of the ionosphere.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, has filed this week's AMSAT report, and if you are new to satellites or wanting to get into operating satellites, a good resource is AMSAT.org. You can find out what satellites are operational and their frequencies. Another great resource is the AMSAT-BB, that would be the AMSAT Bulletin Board, under the tab at AMSAT.org for services. You can ask questions about satellite antennas, tracking software, tracking hardware, and whatever else you're interested in or having trouble with. There are plenty of operators that are willing to share their experiences and expertise with you. Satellite operations have become a lot similar to HF with all of the different modes. There is some slow-scan TV from the International Space Station. We have some using FT8 and other digital modes, and including APRS. We can not leave out, though, FM, single sideband, and CW. Satellites can be used as long as you are in the footprint and not blocked by your house, trees, or other buildings. Thanks, Bruce, for your annual and your weekly AMSAT reports.
It is time for the weekly propagation forecast report, brought to us each week by Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington, who reports this week that at 0725 UTC on February 15th, the Australian Space Weather Forecasting Center issued a geomagnetic disturbance warning. A coronal mass ejection impact occurred around 2200 UTC on February 14th. Magnetic field strength BZ has been southward for the majority of the time since impact, and there is a chance of G1 geomagnetic conditions. BZ is the north-south direction of the interplanetary magnetic field. They predicted a disturbance for February 15th and 16th. Many sunspots appeared during this reporting week, February 9th through the 15th. 3 new sunspot groups on February 9th, 1 more on the 10th, 2 more on the 11th, another on the 12th, and 3 more appeared on February 13th. The average daily sunspot numbers increased from 95.1 to 182.4, and the average daily solar flux went from 155.9 to 196.4. Geomagnetic activity also rose, with the average daily planetary A index going from 11.7 to 13.7, and the middle latitude numbers from 7.6 to 10.7. The most active days were at the beginning and end of the week, with the planetary A index at 21 on February 9th and at 29 on February 15th. On those 2 days, the college A index at Fairbanks, Alaska was 33 and 46. The quietest day was Monday, February 13th, when the planetary A index was 4. So taking a look now at the predicted solar flux, the outlook for the next month looks a little bit more modest, with the predicted solar flux at 175 on February 18th, 170 on February 19th, 165 on the 20th, 160 on the 21st through the 23rd, 130 on February 24th through the 26th, and 140 on February 27th through to March 1st. The predicted planetary A index will be 30 and 12 on February 18th and 19th, 5 on the 20th and 21st, 8 on the 22nd, 10 on the 23rd and 24th, and then 5, 5, and 8 on February 25th through the 27th, and then 5, 5, and 8 again on February 28th through March 2nd.
Just ahead in radio sport, the year-long ARRL Volunteers on the Air VOTA continues. At the VOTA website, you can see the state activation schedule for weekly W1AW portable operations, including these: February 15th through the 21st, Wisconsin, W1AW/9. Also on February 15th through the 21st, California, W1AW/6. February 22nd through the 28th, Michigan, W1AW/8, and Florida, W1AW/4. Some upcoming contests to be aware of. February 16th and 17th, it's the Walk for the Bacon QRP contest. That is CW. February 18th to the 19th, the ARRL International DX contest. That is CW, of course. February 18th to the 19th, the Russian PSK WW contest. That's digital. February 18th, the Feldhell Sprint digital. And on February 19th, the FIST Sunday Sprint. That is CW. Some upcoming section and state convention and division conventions that you might want to be aware of. On February 17th to the 18th, the LCARC Winterfest. That's the ARRL Arkansas State Convention in Hoxie, Arkansas. February 25th, HamCon hosting the ARRL Vermont State Convention. That's in Colchester, Vermont. And on March 3rd through the 4th, the Birmingham Fest hosting the ARRL Alabama Section Convention. That's in Trussville, Alabama. And a reminder that ARRL headquarters will be closed on Monday, February 20th, 2023 for President's Day. There will be no W1A bulletin or code practice transmissions on that day. ARRL HQ will reopen on Tuesday, February 21st at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the Mount Vernon Amateur Radio Club of Alexandria, Virginia will celebrate the 291st birthday of George Washington at Mount Vernon, the former plantation of George Washington and his wife Martha. The club will be on the air February 18th through the 19th on 14.260, 14.070, and 7.040 megahertz. You can visit the ARRL Special Event Station database to find more on-the-air commemorations of Washington's birthday.
Amateur Radio Digital Communications, or ARDC, has released its 2022 annual report detailing grants made for amateur radio projects. John Ross, KD8IDJ, has more details in this report.
In 2022 overall, ARDC approved nearly $6.7 million in grants and distributed nearly $7.7 million. ARDC's 2022 grants were distributed in 4 categories: amateur radio, education, scholarships, and research and development. Amateur radio received $2,145,686. Education got $2,326,744. Scholarships, $1,561,548. And research and development, $2,402,293. In 2022, international grant making was expanded to 13% of funded projects, and that was an increase from 9% in 2020, and is an area where ARDC is aiming for additional growth in 2023. ARDC made 47 grants to amateur radio in 2022, which accounts for almost half of the total projects funded. These included 9 college amateur radio club projects and 33 community amateur radio club projects, which involved network build-outs, equipment upgrades, and repairs to old equipment. Scholarships continue to be a focus for ARDC. In 2023, ARDC is funding 95 scholarships, bringing the all-time ARDC scholar total to 313. The ARRL Foundation was the biggest beneficiary with a grant of $500,000. And in keeping with their goal of reaching underserved groups, scholarship programs were also funded for the Society of Women Engineers and OMIK, a multicultural amateur radio organization, among others. ARDC is a private foundation that exists to support amateur radio and digital communication science and technology. You can read more about ARDC at their website, ardc.net. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
ARDC reviewers focused on selecting projects with strong outreach plans or opportunities to bring new people into the hobby. Projects with unique approaches and ones that aimed for big impacts stood out from the crowd. At the same time, funds were available for bread-and-butter club projects in order to continue supporting typical groups enjoying the hobby. Communications vehicles were commonly applied for, meaning that they were more competitive and difficult to obtain funding for. Clubs often share that these projects re-energize their membership and activities. An example of a standout project is the one proposed by Bay Area Mesh, or BAM. BAM's goal is to install a resilient, high-speed wireless network throughout San Francisco and the greater Bay Area. The network would be used by responders, volunteers, and served agencies during disasters, emergencies, and large community events. ARDC noted in the awarding of the grant, they're building this network using inexpensive commercial-grade Wi-Fi equipment, running open-source software developed by the Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network. Using Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network software allows Bay Area mesh volunteers to set up a node with minimal expertise and effort. Advanced network technology is not needed because the software configures the network automatically. The mission of ARDC is to support, promote, and enhance digital communication and broader communication science and technology, and to promote amateur radio, scientific research, experimentation, education, development, open access, and innovation in information and communication technology. Once again, you can read more about ARDC at their website.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
The 2022 annual Space Apps Challenge, which was held October 1st and 2nd, 2022, brought together a host of participants from different locations, cultures, backgrounds, interests, and skill levels. The theme for the 2020 challenge, Make Space, perfectly describes the primary goals of the event: creating innovative solutions to space-related problems, while also making space for people around the world to participate and engage in a collaborative scientific effort. NASA's Space Apps Challenge really puts students around the world to the test, helping to solve some of our time's toughest problems, said Bill Nelson, NASA administrator. I'm proud of all those who participated and challenged themselves to think creatively. Their remarkable ingenuity is proof that the Artemis generation will help lead us into the future. The challenge underscores the importance and value of NASA's open-source science initiative that creates more advanced and inclusive research faster, builds a more just and equitable world, and provides access so that great minds from all walks of life can participate in science. The 10 global winning teams propose solutions using tools such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, 3D globes and maps, web applications, interactive games, and the infusion of art and music into their projects. The winning teams were Best of Use Science, What's New from Taipei, Taiwan. Best of Use Data was Starflock from Cleveland, Ohio. Best use of technology came from Taming Particles from Vilnius, Lithuania. Galactic Impact, Team Selena from Jamshedpur, India. Best mission concept came from a team called Mars 3D, home from Mendoza, Argentina. The most inspirational came from Team Diamonds from Kumula, Bangladesh. The best storytelling from Team Mimbi from Asuncion, Paraguay. The top global connection from standard NCTU CS students from Taiyuan, Taiwan. The top art and technology came from Team Earth, Wind, and Flare from Boston, Massachusetts. And the best for local impact came from Team Brute Force from Nicosia, Cyprus.
For the Manly Warringah Radio Society in Sydney, Australia, February 26 marks the 100th anniversary of the Manly Warringah Radio Society in Sydney, Australia. That date marks 100 years since the first meeting of the Manly and District Radio Club in 1923. That club eventually became the Manly Warringah Radio Society. To celebrate, the club will be activating the special event station VI 100MB on the day and throughout the remainder of 2023. To find out more, check out Victor India 100 Mike Bravo on QRZ.com and visit the Society's website at mwrs.org.au. That's Mike Whiskey Romeo Sierra.org.au. Meanwhile, special event station OZ625E is on the air until February 28th, commemorating the opening of the new Enigma Museum of Communications in Copenhagen, Denmark. The museum itself opens Saturday, February 25th, and has items dating back to 1624. At Enigma, you'll see from history and historical objects that people have always been challenged in the areas of communication. For more than 80 years, the Danish national treasure Miss Klokken had faithfully provided the Danes with precise times. But mobile phones, the internet, and radio-controlled clocks have made the old voice telephone time service virtually redundant. There was a time when Miss Klokken was a technical revolution that thousands of people contacted daily.
Age does matter when it comes to this special event. It's even worth points if you're a ham taking part in the John Rollins Memorial CW/AMDX event in March. The event is organized by the Antique Wireless Association, and you don't have to be a member to participate. If you are using a transmitter and receiver manufactured before 1970, you can score big points. Likewise, any homebrew gear using tubes that were available before 1970 is also in the running. The activity takes place on 80, 40, and 20 meters on Wednesday, March 1st and Thursday, March 2nd, and again on Saturday, March 4th and Sunday, March 5th. Power is limited to 100 watts for CW and 100 watts carrier level for AM. The event is named for association member John Rollins, W1FPZ, who was a well-known home brewer of radio equipment. John became a silent key in March of 2008. For more details on scoring, you can visit the association's webpage at antiquewireless.org.
2 United Kingdom and Ireland DX contests have been added to the list of events that qualify for special contest call signs from Ofcom. The call signs are administered by the Radio Society of Great Britain on behalf of the regulator, and hams are advised to visit the RSGB website if they wish to apply. They are available to any holder of a UK amateur radio full license or full club license, and the contests can last no longer than 48 hours. The list of qualifying contests can be seen on the RSGB website. Calls will begin with the letter G or M as in Mike, followed by a numeral and a one-letter suffix. You can check the RSGB or Ofcom website for further information.
Competitors and referees received the earliest access to hotel bookings for the World Radio Sport Team Championship, which will be held this July in Bologna, Italy. The online booking system opened on Friday, February 1st. The next round of reservations began on February 7th for visitors and others. According to details on the WRTC Reflector message list, hotels throughout the surrounding areas will be providing support for competitors, referees, judges, sponsors, and the contest committee. The World Radio Sport Team Championship is held every 4 years in a different host country. This year's event is a postponement from last year when health concerns during the pandemic caused it to be called off. 2-member teams whose members have qualified for the event will arrive from every continent to compete in this 24-hour nonstop competition, which is often referred to as the Olympics of Amateur Radio. To see details about the World Radio Sport Team Championship and who its competitors are, visit WRTC2022.it. That's WRTC2022.it.
A mysterious Russian satellite of unknown purpose is breaking up in low Earth orbit, U.S. officials confirmed this week. Back in 2013 and 2014, Russia launched several satellites into space. One of these was an object that space watchers designated as Cosmos 2499. No one knows exactly what Cosmos 2499 is, but it was launched along with communications satellites. It wasn't on the launch manifest and was thought to be debris until it started maneuvering in orbit. Speculation at the time proposed that it was possibly a spy satellite or an experimental anti-satellite weapon. On Monday, the 18th Space Defense Squadron, a part of the U.S. Space Force, confirmed that Cosmos 2499 broke apart on January 4th into 85 chunks of debris almost 700 miles above the Earth. Americans' Guardians now are tracking the dozens of debris chunks hurtling through space. The debris will live in the atmosphere for years to come. What was Cosmos 2499 up to, and why did it break up? No one knows. According to Zach and other observers, Cosmos 2499 maneuvered unusually after it was launched, chasing its own rocket stage, indicating it was being controlled or following some kind of programming. On November 25, 2014, it broadcast Morse code that was picked up by amateur radio enthusiasts. According to Zach, Oleg Ostapenko, then head of the Russian space agency Roscosmos, explained that Cosmos 2499 was not a killer satellite during a 2014 press conference and that it was designed for unspecified research. Ostapenko also said that the satellite had completed its mission, but it continued to maneuver for several years after. According to Zach, Cosmos 2499 last maneuvered in 2017. Now the satellite is just debris floating above the Earth and tracked by America's Space Force. Russia, China, and the U.S. are all making a hard push into space. Among with the newly commissioned Space Force, all branches of the U.S. military are looking to the skies as part of their strategy for fighting wars of the future. The Pentagon wants to use rockets to ship supplies through low Earth orbit on demand. China has said it wants to put astronauts on Mars and the Moon.
You're listening to America's premier amateur radio news magazine of the air. This week in Amateur Radio.
In late January, Hunt and Rockwell counties in North Texas received a wake-up call when an elderly man died after his SUV was swept away by floodwaters. In the wake of that deadly flooding, Bianca Garcia from the National Weather Service held Skywarn training in the city of Greenville at the invitation of the Hunt County Office of Homeland Security, Emergency Management, and the Greenville Fire and Rescue Department. The seminar covered the various threats posed by severe thunderstorms, severe weather safety, and storm reporting. Even with radar and satellite imaging, Garcia emphasized the important role spotters play. She told the audience, "You guys are presenting that special set of human eyes for us on the ground." Many of the attendees were members of the Sabine Valley Amateur Radio Association, which provides trained spotters to the National Weather Service and emergency management agencies. Following the meeting, a 3-night course was also offered on how to become an amateur radio operator. The wake-up call was heeded, and those North Texas counties are now more storm-ready. You can call your local National Weather Service office for their schedule of upcoming free Skywarn spotter training seminars in your area.
To commemorate the 120th anniversary of the Wright brothers' historic first flight, there will be 6 special event stations on the air for the North Carolina QSO party: N4W, N4R, N4I, N4G, N4H, and N4T. Participants who contact these stations can earn 50 points for each station. Stations who contact all 6 stations spelling the word right can earn an additional 200 bonus points. The North Carolina QSO party organizers have announced that N4W will be operating from the Wright Brothers National Memorial in Kitty Hawk, and N4T will be operating again this year from the battleship North Carolina in Wilmington. The North Carolina QSO party begins at 1500 UTC on Sunday, February 26th, and concludes at 0100 UTC on Monday, February 27th. Visit ncqsoparty.org on the web for more details. Again, that's ncqsoparty.org.
It is no secret that the PC business and tech industry at large is going through a bit of a rough patch. However, a new report penned by Dean McCarran of Mercury Research paints an incredibly bleak picture of the state of things. Probably the biggest bombshell is that figures show the x86 processor market has just endured the largest one-year decline in our 30-year history. Based on previously published third-party data, McCarran is also reasonably sure that the 2022 Q4 and full-year numbers represent the worst downturn in PC processor history. The x86 processor downturn observed has been precipitated by the terrible twosome of lower demand and an inventory correction. This menacing pincer movement has resulted in 2022 unit shipments of 374 million processors, a figure 21% lower than in 2021. McCarran shines a glimmer of light in the wake of this gloom, reminding us that overall processor revenue was still higher in 2022 than any year before the 2020s began. The Mercury research analyst explained, most of the downturn in shipments is blamed on excess inventory shipping in prior quarters, impacting current sales. A perfect storm is thus brewing as CPU suppliers are also deliberately limiting shipments to help increase the rate of inventory consumption. PC demand for processors is low, and weakening macroeconomic concerns are driving PC OFMs to reduce their inventory as well.
A respected DXer and noted DXpeditioner from Brazil has recently become a silent key. Mamiro Yoshizawa, PY2DM, was well known among Brazilian amateurs as a radio operator with an enthusiasm for DX and a special affinity for using the 6-meter band. He was a familiar presence in national and international contests and had been a key operator during the T30PY and T30SIX DXpedition to Western Kiribati in 2012. Mamiro became a silent key on the 5th of February. According to a report that appears on QRZ.com, Mamiro's home QTH in the Brazilian city of Mogi das Cruzes had one of the best equipped stations for DXing in the entire country of Brazil. Mamiro Yoshizawa was 83.
When supporters in 30 states step off for a walkathon on Saturday, April 29th, to support the nonprofit Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, the event will be gaining some added momentum. Just as the walkers take stride on the ground, special event station N3P will be taking strides on the air. Hams for PanCan, as the event is known, is an expansion of last year's first effort with a dozen or so members of the Skyview Radio Society near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, according to organizer Rich Ryba, WQ3Q. Rich hopes that news about resources available to pancreatic cancer patients and their families can go an even greater distance this year, coast to coast. The event has special significance for Rich. He lost his younger brother to the disease and is a pancreatic cancer patient himself. Ryba said that the QSOs aren't typical special event exchanges. He said that people want to talk, want to share their experiences with their family. We told our operators to sit and listen. It doesn't matter how long the contact takes if it serves the purpose of helping. Operators are needed in all 50 states. Rich can be contacted directly at his email address, rybar@nb.net. The QRZ.com page for N3P has additional details for clubs or individual operators who want to participate. QSL cards and certificates will be made available for successful contacts.
And now, with his segment on tower climbing and antenna safety, here is Arizona's own Greg Stoddard, KF9MP.
I wanted to take some time to cover some of the common topics related to installing antenna systems on towers. First, let's examine designing and installing an antenna mount for the side of a smaller tower, like the one in your yard. I have built a few homemade mounts out of scrap pieces of steel, usually built from a 3/4-inch steel pipe about 3 feet long and 3 steel bars about 1 to 2 inches across, maybe a 1/4 inch thick. Material like this can often be purchased off the shelf from your local hardware store or welding shop. You will need to climb the tower to measure the sizes and dimensions of the tower, legs, and diagonal members where you intend to mount the sidearm you're building. If you do not have access to a welder, have the shop weld together the mount with the ends of the straps onto the pipe, with about a foot between the straps, which would be centered on the 3-foot pipe. This will give you about a foot above and below the straps onto which you can side mount or end mount an antenna. Pre-drill the holes for U-bolts to mount the straps onto the tower legs. Then also do the same for the U-bolts at the furthest end of the straps from the mounting tube. This mount should be set across one entire face of the tower, so it can be hinged inward during mounting or servicing. After the mount is set in place and the antenna is set on the mount, the third support strap can be clamped to the mount and tower to reduce wobble. This is not a suitable mount for a wide tower unless you intend to mount the antenna close to the tower. The most common rule for mounting distance is 1/2 wavelength from the closest face of the tower. If done properly, would make the tower nearly electrically transparent to the incoming or outgoing signals. If you draw a sine wave on a piece of paper, you'll notice that the voltage at 1/2 wavelength is 0. This is why we prefer to mount antennas at multiples of 1/2 wavelength. At 2 meters, that equals 1 meter out, or 39 inches from the antenna to the closest face on the tower. Imagine the sidearm necessary for 6 meters. At 224 megahertz, it equals about 24 inches for a half-wave distance. If you have done all your measurements accurately at the mounting site, you can assemble the entire structure on the ground and make sure it all fits before taking any of it into the air. Since my homemade mounts usually weigh less than 15 pounds, I usually carry them up the tower with me, set them in place, then bring up the antennas and feed lines. This plan would change depending upon the height of the tower, other antennas on the tower, or how you feel about carrying cargo up the side of the tower safely. Sometimes it's easy, other times there would be too much risk of touching other active antennas, which would make hoisting the mount and antenna by rope from the ground necessary. It is obvious here that pre-planning is essential to ensure safety and reduce the number of trips up and down the tower. While I have promoted the idea of wearing cargo up the tower, I'm the first to admit that limiting trips on the tower and hours on the tower are the real goal in any job I do. Limiting both man-hours and movement will also limit the risk of death, which is cool. I've seen a few different methods of securing amateur-sized coax to a tower leg. The most common I've seen is regular plastic electrical tape. The biggest problem with electrical tape is its lifespan. Mother Nature works to remove the sticky from electrical tape within the first half year. I've also seen cable ties used. As far as I know, clear or white cable ties are not made to survive sunlight, ozone, or Mother Nature's worst, which limit these to about 7 months or less, especially if they are flexed regularly. I think the black cable ties are the best for outdoor mounting. Lastly, I've seen 12-gauge solid wire with insulation cut to 5-inch lengths and wrapped around the tower leg and coax, then twisted. I know this type of scrap material to hold coax to a tower leg for decades with no visible sign of aging. I have also seen a black cable tie over several layers of electrical tape. And coax can change size and length during the day, so always allow for these changes. Remember, tower work at any height can easily become deadly. Money spent on books, videos, and climbing gear is well worth the investment. This is Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
And finally this week, imagine you're an amateur radio operator in the 70s for a moment. You just purchased a high-tech gadget that lets you talk with people vast distances away simultaneously without any need for wires. As you dial through different frequencies, listening to people speaking with ships and foreign tongues chatting away, you hear a ghostly musical tone through the static before a monotone voice announces 891 891 237. It repeats it a few times before the static drowns it out. You wonder for a moment, what was that? Then the music plays again, and the man repeats himself. Not knowing quite what to think, you move on, and when you come back to that frequency later, you hear nothing but static and question whether you even heard anything at all. That ghostly radio station is called the Englishman. Not only did it exist in the 70s, it's still on the air today. This was the experience of many amateur radio operators of the 70s. They're called number stations, and many believe there are strings of secret code being broadcast to spies around the world. In short, a number station is a shortwave radio broadcast transmitting an incomprehensible series of letters or numbers believed to be part of secret instructions to undercover operatives. The idea would be that spies working undercover could use easily attainable shortwave radios to receive information and commands. In 1998, for example, a network of Cuban spies in the U.S. were caught decoding messages from the station Atención. Number stations may be relics from as far back as World War I, but thousands are still in operation to this day. What are stations like Bulgarian Betty, the Lincolnshire Poacher, Attention, Cherry Ripe, and the Russian Man broadcasting today? As recently as 2010, as far as the public is aware, Russian spies embedded in the U.S. were being directed via these shortwave-coded radio transmissions. An FBI counter-spy program called Operation Ghost Stories culminated in the arrest of 10 sleeper agents who were in deep cover assignments to gain access to U.S. secrets. The 10 agents were arrested and charged with espionage, but were eventually freed in a prisoner exchange with the U.S. So if these stations are still broadcasting, are there still spies listening? With cybersecurity and advanced data encryption advancing so quickly in the face of new technologies, it's almost romantic to think that somewhere out there is a spy scribbling down shortwave radio codes. Nevertheless, analysts and experts point out that these stations have not really lost any of their original usefulness. Though a thumb drive or encrypted message across the internet may be able to provide more information than a radio message, the message itself hasn't lost any of its effectiveness at providing expeditious contact in an area where consensual communication is denied or dangerous.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeaters all across North America and around the world on great repeater systems like the KD5 DMT 145.290 and 443.025 MHz repeater system in Centerton and Garfield, Arkansas. Owned and operated by the Benton County Radio Operators Club, serving Northwest Arkansas, Southwest Missouri, and Northeast Oklahoma.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the Rich on Tech Podcast, courtesy of Premier Networks, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.